Ms. Tin Pei Ling.
Mr. Speaker, sir, Singaporeans and families have been facing higher costs of living prices from food to daily necessities to utilities, and all these costs have increased quite significantly for them. I think so far over from yesterday to today, we've heard many honourable parliamentarians in this chamber talked about this. And this impact is especially salient for middle and lower income households, both financially and psychologically. According to the Department of Statistics, Singapore's overall CPI, inflation, rose 4.0% from January 2021 to January 2022, although MAS core inflation measure was 2.4%. Household income growth barely matched the CPI growth in the same period for these households, as median monthly household income from work grew by 3.6% in nominal terms from 2020 to 2021. So at first glance, middle and low-income households may feel pressured that their incomes are only barely matching the rise in prices. But after taking into account government transfers, middle and low-income households would have seen higher real income growth. With government transfers and taxes considered, the Gini coefficient in 2021 evidently fell from 0.444 to 0.386, the second lowest level since 2000. Hence, I'm glad that the government has multiple schemes such as the CDC vouchers, education accounts top-ups, and enhanced YouSave rebates in place to support these households. However, we must not undermine the psychological factor of the public, even if income is still outpacing inflation in reality. It is not always immediately obvious how government transfers have buffered the impact. It takes multiple steps to calculate the net impact. Moreover, there remains much uncertainty in how costs can fluctuate in the future, and therefore how families can or cannot cope. The psychology of uncertainty, if left unaddressed, can severely affect one's well-being, but more importantly, threaten our nation's ability to stay together, overcome crises together, and progress together. Rising global demands for the same products that we demand with the arrival of COVID-19 vaccines, oil and gas supply crunch made worse by geopolitical turmoil, and global supply chain woes are driving costs up. Clearly, these are macro factors beyond our control, but these are hurting Singaporeans. For example, the sudden spike in energy price forced a few of the open energy market operators out of operations. Customers are transferred back to grid operator, the SP Group, or they could choose other private operators that survived. Regardless, energy prices have increased significantly across the board. During a house visit in January this year, I met a McPherson resident who runs a small shop, and she shared her frustration and anxiety with me. She had subscribed to Best Electric, one of the open energy market operators that went bust last year. Her monthly electricity bill doubled from $1,800 in the first month after SP took over her account, and this monthly bill further increased to over $8,000. It was more than a fourfold increase. For small operators with a modest margin, such a shocking increase drives them into the red. Needless to say, these small operators, many of whom are Singaporeans with families, will see their household disposable income being affected as well. Could the government have stepped in more strongly in such extraordinary instances to help mitigate the increase? Perhaps to put a cap to the amount of increment for these affected small businesses and households in such instances where the impact or the increase was not of their own doing. In another example, an elderly couple in McPherson in their 70s live on their CPF payouts, an allowance of a couple of hundreds of dollars per month from their 3 children. They are typical middle-income Singaporeans who have retired and are living in a flat of their own. One may argue that this is not too bad, and they certainly receive subsidies and benefits from various government schemes as well. But both elderly have chronic medical conditions that incur recurring medical costs. Medisave savings are also fast depleting for them. They tried and are still trying to be self-reliant, But rising food, groceries, utilities, and public transport costs in recent times are really testing for them. While Singaporeans understand that some factors are beyond Singapore's immediate control and that self-efforts are important, the pressure from fast-rising costs stress them. Successive news or observations of price increases in a short time frame are unsettling. I sincerely appreciate government's efforts in introducing various support packages to help households and retirees cope with living costs, as well as uplifting workers to uplift wages. The latest measures announced in Budget 2022, along with those introduced in the past, will help to push down the bottom line costs and push up top line income for households. Government transfers through various help schemes help to offer buffer, but households are uncertain how much the costs will rise further. How long might they be eligible for government subsidies or assistance, and whether the assistance is even enough for them to cope. For retirees who no longer have active income, this worry intensifies. What happens after the assurance package expires in 5 years? What happens if the oil price spikes again, or if the oil price and therefore the electricity bill stays high? Singaporeans must not feel that they are left to deal with the pressures alone, as this can erode our sense of togetherness and undermine the social compact in Singapore. Hence, our government must continue to assure Singaporeans of its support through words and deeds. Next, I would like to speak on the national reserves. Again, I am thankful that our past and present leaders have been judicious in managing our reserves, painstakingly saving up for storms like this COVID-19 pandemic. Money drawn from our past reserves has been put to good use as we battle the crisis and provide tangible support for Singaporeans. The government's total draw from past reserves is now revised to $42.9 billion for the period of FY 2020 to FY 2022, less than the initial draw of $52.0 billion from past reserves announced at the Fortitude budget in May 2020. Drawing less than expected is encouraging as it signals stable economic growth and prudent spending. My question now is, from this point, what is the government's plan for our national reserves? Our pioneers took more than 50 years to save up this pot of gold because they want to protect their children and future generations. Similarly, we have a duty to use this pot of gold wisely and make sure that we put back what we took once we can, so that our children and their children can continue to have this asset to fall back on when they face the crisis of their generation. Lest I get misunderstood, let me state that I believe it was necessary for us to draw on our reserves to help Singapore and Singaporeans get through this COVID-19 storm. I also believe that at this juncture, when Singaporeans are struggling with escalating cost of living, now is not the right time to put money back into the reserves. Still, we must keep in mind that we cannot deplete our reserves, that we must guard it judiciously and instill a discipline to put back what we took at the earliest opportunity when we can afford to do so. If not all at once, then in phases. Therefore, could the government share what circumstances or indicators need to be met for money to be returned to the reserves, and is there a timeline that the government is looking at? Next, my third point is on building up for the future. Many of the problems we face today are not novel. We probably already have the solutions to these old problems, and we need to accelerate the implementation. For instance, our energy needs are over-reliant on oil and gas that we import. We benefit from processing these imported natural resources, but our electricity prices are almost totally dependent on the prices set by oil export countries. One solution is to diversify to use clean energy so as to dilute the impact of oil prices on our own energy costs, and I believe this topic has been very passionately debated by fellow colleagues yesterday and today. And I'm also aware that the Energy Market Authority is also actively exploring these solutions. Well, another possible solution is to actively deploy smart tech that allow us to move from reactive to predictive maintenance so that we can save energy and reduce waste. This also includes other types of green tech as well. The upfront capex could be costlier, but the longer-term savings could be worth it. Therefore, the problem is not without a solution, but could we hasten it? We need to build future-ready infrastructure that can last, and we need to build up enterprises and talents that are skilled and versatile. Hence, I am supportive of the plan to strengthen our digital capabilities and invest in next-bound infrastructure. When others are looking at 5G, we must look at 6G. When others are looking at Web 3.0, we must start imagining Web 4.0. The current S-curve is already saturated. We need to get onto the next. And to do so, of course, we need good people. Therefore, I'm definitely also very supportive of the plans to invest in our people throughout the stages of their lives, from when they are young and in school, to when they have entered the workforce and can benefit from mentorship, to when they reach mid-career, and to when they have become mature workers. It used to be that one's career is a straight line progression, hardly changing jobs or industry. But it will increasingly be commonplace for one to change path multiple times in his or her working lifespan. Hence, by investing in our people, we not only help Singaporeans to achieve their many aspirations, but also recognize them as our nation's key asset. I will also speak more on this during the COS debate. By building up for the future, we can better take advantage of the opportunities and rise comfortably above the challenges that we now face, to move away from quibbling over small margins, but changing games altogether. Singapore's social compacts have evolved over time, from focusing on survival as a nation in the 1960s to 1980s, to the many helping hands approach that encouraged a greater sense of collective responsibility, and that was from the 90s to mid-20s, to the mid-2000s, to now recognizing that government and the community need to play a bigger role to complement individual and family efforts. Singapore has done well so far. As we look ahead, the world is getting chaotic again. Singapore society is also getting more complex with more sophisticated needs and issues. There are still many challenges and uncertainties ahead. Therefore, to continue keeping our people and Singapore together, we must have sufficient guardrails, sufficient support, and very importantly, mutual trust that we will be there for each other in good times and bad. As the government draws from our treasury and reserves to provide financial stimulus and put in place the various schemes and legislations to distribute help fairly and boost flailing sectors and groups that need help, businesses have to do its best to survive, to transform, to keep jobs for workers, to make space, to create capacity to help groom our workers. And workers too will need to be willing to accept concessions during tough patches, and also be willing to learn and keep learning to always be better than who we were yesterday. And at the society level, the more able must also be willing to take less and give more. And the less able need to also be willing to keep trying their best to adjust, to change track, to upskill, and to progress. If we can all be more accommodating, a bit more give and take, try a bit harder for each other, I'm sure there is no storm that we cannot overcome or weather through, and that Singapore will definitely emerge much stronger with every generation. And therefore, I support the budget. Thank you.